A storm brewing in Port Charles. Joss, Vaughn, Lucas, and the shadow of Jack Brennan. There were weeks in Port Charles when secrets simmered beneath the surface, when the peaceful lull of the docks and the gentle hum of traffic passing through Elm Street felt deceptive, as if the entire town were holding its breath. This was one of those weeks, one where every whisper carried weight, every choice splintered into consequences, and every heartbeat felt like a warning. And sitting right in the center of this widening spiral was Jocelyn, torn between the chaos of the present and the shadows she sensed gathering behind her. Joss had always believed she could recognize trouble before it arrived. Being Carly Spencer's daughter practically guaranteed that instinct. She had grown up understanding how quickly calm skies could shatter, how swiftly people you trusted could vanish into danger, and how easily a single misstep could draw the eye of someone powerful enough to reshape your entire life. But even with her intuition, she hadn't expected her current fears to circle back to Lucas Jones, someone whose quiet gentleness rarely stirred conflict. Yet, as days passed, she couldn't ignore the knot forming in her gut, a warning that Lucas had drifted towards something far darker than an unfortunate romance. Lucas's new relationship, born out of equal parts hope and vulnerability, was supposed to be a chance at beginning again. He had weathered heartbreak more times than he deserved, and those who loved him wished only for his peace. But Joss noticed the cracks early. She saw the way Lucas hesitated when people asked about the man he was seeing, how he changed the subject when conversations drifted too close, how something guarded flickered behind his eyes. There were little signs, subtle shifts in his tone and posture, that suggested this wasn't the kind of love story that ended in healing. This was the kind that drained a person drop by drop until nothing remained but regret and exhaustion. And Joss, sensitive to the emotional temperature of those around her, felt the warning signs like a cold draft sneaking beneath the doorframe. The only person she dared share this fear with was Vaughn. Their relationship lived in that suspenseful space between stolen moments and unspoken promises, suspended by the fragile thread of secrecy. They had tried to end things, tried in the way two people try to pretend desire dissipates simply because someone in power demands it to. But willpower was no match for the gravity between them, and Joss found herself returning to Vaughn with the same inevitability as tides returning to shore. In the private quiet of his living room, with the world locked outside, she let her worries unravel. She told him about Lucas, about the tension brewing beneath the surface, about the feeling that something terrible lingered just out of sight. Vaughn listened, concerned but cautious. He had seen enough of Port Charles to know Joss's instincts weren't to be dismissed. Yet there was a danger in their closeness, one that neither of them could ignore. They were connected by adrenaline, affection, and the thrill of being together despite the warning that had come from a man whose interference rarely ended quietly. Jack Brennan. His name drifted through Port Charles like smoke, thick, suffocating, and impossible to disperse. He had a way of bending conversations around him, turning casual warnings into thinly veiled threats, and shifting the emotional temperature of a room merely by walking through the door. And Joss and Vaughn knew that Brennan had already made his position clear. Their relationship was to end. Not later. Not eventually. Immediately. But telling two young people to stay away from each other was like striking flint over dry grass. It only made the fire burn brighter. The danger, however, wasn't in the relationship itself. It was in Brennan's certainty that he had the right to dictate their choices. And that certainty made him reckless. Brennan prided himself on being obeyed. When he spoke, people either followed or vanished. He didn't handle defiance with patience, nor did he appreciate being rendered irrelevant. So when he appeared in the upcoming commercial clip declaring what happened to those who ignored him, it was not the empty posturing of a man merely trying to intimidate. It was a glimpse into the mind of someone who believed consequences were tools, and people were disposable. If Brennan truly had been referring to Joss and Vaughn, then their fragile romance had just become a fuse burning toward destruction. Yet what Brennan failed to realize, what he could not realize, was that he was stepping into a battlefield where he was disastrously outmatched. Because he had caught the attention of Carly Spencer. Years had softened her smile but sharpened her instincts. Nothing in Port Charles moved without Carly seeing its shadow. Nothing threatened her children without awakening a part of her that had weathered enemies far more cunning, far more dangerous, far more ruthless than Jack Brennan. She had survived mob wars, corporate takeovers, personal betrayals, and the kind of heartbreak that could shatter a lesser person. What Brennan saw as a woman with influence and reputation, others knew as a force with the potential to disrupt entire power structures. And Joss was her daughter. That changed the calculus entirely. Carly didn't strike first, not in this phase of her life. She observed. She assessed. She let her silence settle like a velvet shroud over teeth sharpened by years of war. But once she decided someone posed a real threat, her retaliation became a quiet storm, precise, devastating, and unforgettable. So when whispers reached her that Brennan had inserted himself into Joss's private life, that he had stepped over a line he didn't even know existed, Carly's calm shifted into something colder, something strategic. She didn't show her anger, she didn't confront him. Instead, she moved with the deliberate grace of a woman preparing for a long, calculated dismantling of a man who had no idea the ground beneath him was already thinning. If Brennan harmed Joss, if he frightened her, manipulated her, or used Lucas as leverage, then he wasn't merely inviting Carly's wrath. He was inviting an annihilation far worse than whatever menace he believed he wielded. Yet while the adults maneuvered in the shadows, the younger generation remained caught in the emotional crossfire. Lucas spiraled into something none of them could fully define. Joss struggled to protect him without exposing her secrets. Vaughn found himself balancing affection with danger. And the looming presence of Brennan threatened to fracture everything they fought to keep intact. That was the tragic paradox of Port Charles. No one's story existed in isolation. Every choice, every confession, every whispered lie created ripples that touched someone else, someone vulnerable, someone unsuspecting, someone ill-prepared for the fallout. And now, with Brennan growling warnings, Lucas slipping into peril, and Carly quietly preparing her counterattack, the entire city felt like a powder keg waiting for the spark. Joss sensed it, felt it in her bones. What she didn't know was how quickly it would ignite, or how deeply the blast would cut into the people she loved. Because in Port Charles, danger rarely approached openly. It crept. It whispered. It waited for the moment when no one was looking, and then struck from the shadows. And this time, the shadow's name was Jack Brennan.